Welcome to Pacific Unitarian Universalist Church. We intend on being a beacon in the South Bay of all that's good and right. A place of diversity, ideally a place of aspires towards equality, a place that's open to people of all races and creeds. We had a great day yesterday. It was really felt like a new day to us. We had Zach Ritter come in and talk on our second of our 7-part race series at 10 o'clock, Adult Ed, which we're filming here. People are welcome to come up and sit. We had, a handful of folks come watch, and we usually have about, by the end of the week, 140 people watching these series, which is great. We had an afternoon party with Amanda Keating Zuner, who's a friend of the church now, an anthropologist who was targeted by right-wing folks, and she engaged us in a conversation about the election and a few tips on how we might relate to some of those difficult folks in our lives. We did Laundry Love, just got back with a few folks. There was 7 or 8 people that enjoyed that service. And we also had one of our leader cooks took the horns and made soup, and people purchased it, and we're going to dedicate that to food services for those who are in need. So we had a great day yesterday. This afternoon, we're having our usual 1 o'clock call. It's kind of a summary, a what did we learn moment for people who tune in on that. And this is going to be filmed, so make sure you watch your mouth and be careful. As usual, we have our Tuesday call with me. We've got lots going on. So check the website out, and the newsletter is still pretty fresh and all of those things. One of the financial leaders of our church and sort of one of the drivers of things that make this church happen is Tara. She's going to come up. She's been engaged in this race conversation from the very beginning. She's going to share our chalice words right now while I light the chalice.
Hello. Our words today are by Reverend Gretchen Healy. She says, life comes for us in 1,000 different ways. In a moment, every expectation, life comes and goes like our breath. It does not take kindly to our desire for control. As we light this flame, may we ourselves let go and be open to transformation.
Thank you, Tara. This morning, it's not me mostly, which is a relief to many, I'm sure. We'll hear from 3 folks who've been participating with about 15 to 25 others regularly on these Zoom calls at Race. They're at 1 o'clock. You can check the website and come on. It's open field for anyone who wants to join in. You're not too late. Today, they're going to film it, like I said, but these folks have been in discussions. We call them deeper dive talks. And the goal has been to explore the aspects of racism that affect us individually and as a society. People have shared their journeys. It's pretty amazing. And I want to steal a prayer some parts of a prayer from Kenny Wiley, who says this. He's a UU. He says, most Unitarian Universalists are here because we feel welcome here. Some of us were too agnostic somewhere else. Some of us weren't vindictive enough somewhere else. Or we were too working class somewhere else, or lesbian somewhere else. We were too nerdy, introverted. We might have been too gay married somewhere else. We might have slid down the slippery slope of authority to find ourselves here. Many of us are here because this faith and the people in it affirmed you may not be perfect, but your life matters just the same. That's what's on the line now. That's what we're talking about culturally. Through racism and posthumous victim blaming, through silence and bullets and indifference, vilification, lots of ways Black people have been told since they've arrived in this country that their lives don't matter or that they matter only conditionally. Black lives matter maybe if you're educated or if you're respectful. Sometimes even then, your lives don't matter. Right now, we as UUs and all of those out there with open hearts and a desire to create a real fairness, I'll talk about that with the kids, are in a fight to join the struggle to end Jim Crow that so many before fought. Lydia Marie Child, William Lloyd Garrison are calling us to this fight from posthumously. Lucy Stone is calling us. Fannie B. Williams, Frances Ellen Harper are in our ear. James Reeb, a UU minister who went down south to end segregation in the 60s, lost his life. Viola Sayula, a layperson, calling us. Guided by that enduring, unfulfilled promise and the inherent worth and dignity of everyone, we continually talk about race, talk about how marginalization happens and how systematically racism works and thus doesn't work. So today's a heavy day. People will share a bit of their personal journeys, a bit of what they've learned. So we're going to hear from Vivian and Tara and Frank Adams. But right now we're going to hear from Severin, who's going to sing us a hymn.
This is number 133 in the hymnal. I keep finding new gems in the hymnal. It's called One World. One world, this for all its sorrow. One world, shaping one tomorrow. One humanity, though riven. We, to whom the world is given. From the one where there is no turning, for one where the prophets yearning, one the world of
It's now time for our children's moment. I'd like to invite all the kids forward in front of the screen as if it were a fireplace, or right on this rug where we historically have gathered, which I wish we were all here today. Physically, that would be great. And hopefully soon enough, probably not as soon as the president imagines, but soon enough we will be back here physically, and that will be a grand day. I think churches all around the synagogues and every gathering, mosque place will be thrilled when that day happens. But one of the things when I come in to do a children's lesson with the kids in the classrooms, I always want to talk about the difference between fairness and equality. And this is a great example of that. Fairness and equality are not always the same thing, right? We have some very good rules in this society about, that apply to everyone, right? You can get arrested for stealing. And so you put these on the scales of justice, which I got here, and presumably that's the same, right? It's the same rule for everyone. And you have lots of different things. African Americans, Latino people, white folks all get their license at the same time. That's essentially a fairness, right? But when you start looking at society, even though the rules are equal, sometimes things aren't necessarily fair, because the schools some kids get to go to, mostly that's true for white kids, they're better. And then you have disadvantaged criminal activities. It's sad, but it's true. If you have a black face, you are much more likely to get arrested or to get kicked out of school for the same activity someone else would. So that weighs things down in an unfair way, right? There's a whole bunch of silent, quiet things that take place. There's trauma when this inequality happens. When they've given darker-skinned little kids the choice between dolls, very frequently they've often chosen the lighter-skinned doll, not the one that looks like them, with the statement that they thought that doll was inherently better. So young these people are. And the scales, just to the advantage in our system, in ways that are overt and covert, just seem to continually tip in the advantage of white people and the disadvantage of black and brown folks. So I ask you kids, think about what's fair, right? It would be fair, or it would be equal, if everyone had the same amount of money. But we're also differently talented. So that makes things that are necessarily equal not always necessarily fair. And it goes back and forth like that. So I want you to just take a minute and think in your life, sometimes when you have felt like that wasn't fair, even if things were equal. What about people getting food at the table? Should a bigger person get more food than a smaller person? What if everybody got the same food? We have to think about what's fair and equal. And in a world that has been disadvantaging people because of their skin color, we need to make efforts to pay more attention to getting fairness done. So please be an ally in that, and think about your church as encouraging you to think about the distinctions that we see and some of the things that we don't necessarily see immediately. That's an important moral lesson, is to look a little bit deeper at what's really truly fair and making it that way. So talk about that with your friends. Think about the differences. You'll find them all over the place, right? Equal and the same and fair are not the same words. Explore that a little bit. Play with that and have some fun with it. Thanks. I now want to light our chalice, which we always do for all those special things that come up. We normally have folks come up and they speak for themselves, which is a very democratic act, but we're not all here. We have our own Lisa Seitz engaged in the choir and a lot of activities. She's going in for shoulder surgery this week on the 14th. We think about her. We think about Penny Trinnell recovering from hip surgery. We think about Chelsea, whose wrist and arm are still not back well. We think about the Williams family who lost their house in Santa Cruz, burned right to the ground. And we think about all the people who have immense challenges right now. They're homeless and they face the risk of COVID. People have to work dangerous jobs for low wages. I light that chalice for all those particular concerns today. And I'd like to invite up Frank Adams, who's going to share with us a prayer. Please listen in and find a still spot to hear that.
Good morning. The prayer this morning was adapted from a longer prayer entitled Your Life Matters, also written by Kenny Wiley. Wiley says, and we say here at PUC, that you are a woman and your life matters. You are gay or lesbian and your life matters. You have a disability and your life matters. You were not loved as a child and your life matters. You struggle with depression and your life matters. Right now, we are being called by our ancestors, our principals, by young Black activists across the country to promote and affirm you are young and Black and your life matters. They are calling you a thug and your life matters. I've been taught to fear you and your life matters. Our ancestors, principals, and fellow humans are calling on us to promote and affirm with deeds and words, Black lives matter. And so we do. Let's take a moment to realize the very profound truth that everyone lives out their own unique reality, and that we honor that truth here today. Amen.
In this order, I'd like to invite up, will speak Vivian Howe, and then Frank Adams is going to share, and then we're going to have another short hymn from Severin, and we're going to hear from Tara, you something Dutch sounding. So I'd like to invite up Vivian to share her thoughts and thank her and Tara for largely championing this issue for us and pushing this issue of justice forward. And making this time the time of change. Vivian?
Good morning. I'm Vivian Howe. And for about 2 decades, I've been raising up anti-racism programs in this church. Some of you may remember the Journey Toward Wholeness program we did, a weekend of workshops in the early 2000s. Then there was the Building the World We Dream About curriculum we did several years ago. We've had race relations film series. We've had the occasional speaker on a Sunday morning. There was always some interest, limited interest. but no long-term impact. In fact, there was some pushback from a few people because we're all nice people here. No racists at PUC. The conversation about race often ends quickly with disagreement about the very definition of the word race or racism. Is it simply prejudice against a person or group? Do you have to hate someone to be a racist? Wear a hood, utter racial slurs? Race scholars define racism as prejudice plus power. So by that definition, only white people can be racist. People of color don't have institutional power. Hard to accept for some people. So what is the definition of racism? The only way to settle it once and for all is to go to the unquestioned arbiter of the English language, the dictionary. Merriam-Webster's definition reads, a belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. To some people, that just doesn't sound adequate. One of those people, a 22-year-old Missouri woman named Kennedy Mitchum, felt strongly enough that she actually wrote an email to the editors of Merriam-Webster. You see, Kennedy Mitchum lives in a town near Ferguson where an unarmed Black youth, Michael Brown, was fatally shot by white policemen in 2014. You may recall this sparked the Black Lives Matter movement and protests that continue until this day. Mitchum said she was tired of hearing people tell her that the dictionary meaning was one thing, but what was actually happening in the world is another. The way that racism occurs in real life is not just prejudice. It's systemic racism, institutional racism that people are protesting. Mitchum was shocked that the day after she wrote her email, the editors of the dictionary actually wrote back to her. After several email exchanges, she convinced them that indeed a revision is in order. The dictionary's editor wrote, because people often turn to the dictionary to get a more nuanced view of the way a word is being used in a particular context, and because the use of the word racism to specifically describe racial prejudice combined with systemic oppression is now so common, ignoring this meaning of the word may leave readers confused or misled, end quote. White discourse on racism has historically relied on the dictionary meaning that says that one must believe a particular race is superior or inferior. Under this definition, someone is racist if, for example, in a one-on-one interaction, they intentionally mistreat someone by using a racial slur, by denying them a seat in the restaurant or job or admission to a school. But today we see that systemic racism has and is doing harm to people of color. For example, poll taxes kept many poor people of color from voting, and today's gerrymandering of congressional districts is diluting the doctrine of one person, one vote. The practice of redlining systematically disenfranchised Black homeowners and resulted in a widening disparity between households of Black and white individuals. You know what happens when there's too many minorities that move into a neighborhood. White flight and a dramatic drop in home prices. Our country's police are part of a greater criminal justice system that is racist, reinforcing the false idea that people are innately criminals if their skin is a certain color. It's open season for Black men and women and even children. Shoot first, ask questions later. So a few days ago, I looked up the definition of the word racism on my computer. The newly revised Merriam-Webster online definition now reads, the systemic oppression of a racial group to the social, economic, and political advantage of another, specifically white supremacy and institutional racism. Yes, we live in a society where racism is pervasive. It's systemic, and we may not know a single racist. Now we know the full definition of the word, and maybe we can have a real conversation that goes beyond arguing semantics and extends to possible changes, to real solutions. My friends, it's time.
Good morning again. I'm Frank Adams, and my wife Maureen and I are thrilled to have found this church and to found this congregation. And we're looking forward to becoming members very soon. First, I want to thank Vivian and all the members of our group. I've learned a great deal from them individually and from the information they shared. These discussions have helped me come to the understanding on a very personal level of how much white male privilege and systemic racism have played a part in my own life. The terms white privilege and systemic racism are often used in discussions about race, but it's sometimes difficult to agree on what those labels actually mean. So I'd like to share with you some of my own experiences in hopes that they might help illustrate how white privilege and systemic racism can operate in the real world. I was born in the Deep South and remained there until I left for college. We were very close to poor, but because my father was a World War II veteran, he was able to attend college and get a low-interest loan on a new home. In theory, Black veterans were also eligible for the same benefits. But in our state, they were not welcome at colleges other than those that were historically Black. And due to unfair lending practices by banks and the use of redlining by the FHA, Black veterans were often unable to obtain loans for homes in their own neighborhoods, and they were unwelcome in mine. The schools I went to were all white. Black children were educated in their part of town, where schools were underfunded and where very few high school graduates went on to college. College for me was at an all-male school that was 98% white. Admission was by scholarship, and in my state, scholarships were only offered to white males. Next came the Army, where 1 out of 3 of my fellow soldiers were Black, but only a tiny fraction of officers were Black. This was driven by the fact that officers were selected from college graduates, and at that time, less than 1 in 25 Black males had a college degree. The lack of Black college graduates was also reflected in my medical school class, where there were 60 students with only 1 being Black. I also had only 7 female classmates. During the years of postgraduate training, I had no Black or female colleagues. And when I joined the ranks of working physicians, only 1 in 30 doctors were Black, and only 1 in 10 were women. I often hear others point out that the advances Black Americans have made in the last 50 years since I left home are important, but unfortunate. The truth is that many of these same inequalities are still present today. Black applicants are still denied home loans at twice the rate of white applicants, and Black families own homes at half the rate. Since home ownership is a major factor in a family's wealth, the average white household across the nation is worth over $190,000. while the average Black household is worth $24,000. This huge imbalance is even larger in California. Unfortunately, this disparity in wealth has actually been increasing in the past 20 years. Black high school students in California still have twice the dropout rate and twice the suspension rate of white students. And Black college students graduate at a rate 40% lower than white students. And in healthcare education, while 1 in 7 Americans are Black, only 1 in 20 doctors are Black. So what I've come to realize after being in this group for a relatively short while is that the personal narrative that I have had for my life of boy from modest means gets educated, works hard, and ends up living in this beautiful place was in large part enabled by a system that shut doors to others and propped them open for me. It's hard to explain why all these injustices, which have been happening all around me for years, are just now coming to the forefront of my attention. I don't believe my lack of awareness was because I was what most people would call a racist. I have had the privilege of getting to know and care for too many wonderful Black patients, and there have been and still are many Black people in my own family and in my personal life about whom I care deeply. But what has become apparent to me is you don't have to be a racist to benefit from a racist system. The advantages you are given can be subtle and can easily go unrecognized if you aren't paying enough attention. And I'm sad to admit how easy it was to simply accept that it was, quote, just the way things were, and not think about why. This group has helped me become aware of what has and is continuing to happen to many of our fellow Americans. They have also helped me come to the realization that doing nothing about all this just can't be an option. I'm still not exactly sure what I can do, but I am sure that I have to do something. We all have to do something. To paraphrase an old adage that applies to so many things today, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men and women to do nothing.
We are climbing Jacob the ladder. We are climbing Jacob the ladder. We are climbing Jacob the ladder. Brothers, sisters, every rung goes higher, higher. Every rung goes higher, higher. Every rung goes higher, higher. Sisters, brothers.
Hi, my name is Tara Unverzat. I'm a lifelong Unitarian and a member of the Pacific Unitarian Church for about 25 years now. I wanted to start my story with the first day of kindergarten. I remember that day vividly. It was the scariest, most exciting day that I had had up to that point. And I remember that I was so excited about going to school where I was going to learn new things. I had an older brother and sister, and I knew that they had gone and they had learned things that I wanted to know. I had known at that point that people would put little marks on paper, and there was books that had these marks, and people could look at them and they could get information. I wanted to learn how to do that. So I was really excited about that. But I was terrified because I knew walking into that classroom, there was going to be a lot of people that I didn't know. I had no idea who they were. I didn't know what I was going to say to them. I was super shy. I didn't even know that if I was going to be able to get words out of my mouth. I was pretty sure I wasn't going to be able to. I didn't know if they were going to be nice or if they were going to be mean to me. I was terrified. But I decided to be brave and walk into that classroom. And it was terrifying, and I don't think I said a word that day, but it was really fun, and we sang songs, and the teacher read a couple of stories. I remember painting. I remember riding the tricycle out on the playground they painted a track on the ground, and I would ride that around. And it was a lot of fun, and I was really glad that I went. And the next day I went, and I was still terrified, a little less terrified than the day before, but still terrified. The next week it was easier. And after a little while, it actually became a second home, and I was comfortable being there, and I was comfortable being around these people, and I learned how to interact with them. And what I learned then is that being brave and working through discomfort is an important part of life. And I've taken that forward with me. So fast forward, grew up, got married, had my own kids, moved to Torrance. And I specifically moved to Torrance because I had been raised in a white, affluent community, and I wanted my children to be exposed to a more diverse community. And in Torrance, in the neighborhood that we're in, we have a lot of Asian families. And one of the things that I learned is that there are some countries in Asia that finish their school year in January, February. And so businessmen would be relocated here in February, and we would have a couple of new kids in the school every February, which is sort of interesting. It's in the middle of our school year here, and these kids would come in not knowing English into this new environment. And my middleest daughter, if there was a girl that was her age, tended to take her under her wing when she arrived, and this new girl would arrive in class. And she would show her around and introduce her to the routine and invite her to sit with her at lunch with her friends and play with her at recess on the playground and partner with her at PE. And I always thought it was really charming that she did that. And I also would think about how scary that must have been for that Asian girl coming not only to new school with all these people that she had no idea, but she wasn't even speaking the language, and the culture was completely different. And I was happy that my daughter helped break that ice a little bit. Moving a few years forward, my daughter went to middle school, and she befriended some Latinas. And I thought, oh, this is cool. My daughter has these diverse friends. And I found out that the friends were from Hawthorne, which is a neighboring community, lower income, more diverse, more ethnicity than even Torrance. And I thought that was really cool. And I thought it was really interesting that and great that the parents brought their children all that way every day to go to a good school and get a good education. That was fabulous. And I'll pause my story right there and fast forward to now. And what I've learned in the last year or so and through the deeper dive is that really when I was thinking that they were bringing their children to a better school to get a better education, what I was really thinking was bringing them to a white school to get a white education. And I hadn't really thought about that before. They had the same curriculum, and I have a feeling their teachers were very good. But somehow my school and our education was better. That strikes me. Couple months later, into the school year, I discovered that these girls weren't doing their homework, and I was appalled. And I said, thought, well, aren't their parents making sure that they get their homework done? They've gone to all this trouble to get them in this school. And I was told that the parents were actually upset that they went to the trouble of bringing their daughters to this school and had their daughters in these schools for 6 hours every day. And the teachers couldn't teach them what they needed to know during those 6 hours. They had to do more at home. Flash forward to now. I realized they were actually right. And if we are expecting the public school system to be an equalizer, why are we expecting there to be resources in the home? Somebody pointed out maybe those parents didn't know the math curriculum or knew enough English to help them. And beyond that, to me, even if they did, why are we assuming the parents are good teachers? Why are we assuming that when that child goes home, that they have an environment that they can continue to study in? Maybe they have grandparents they need to take care of. Maybe they have other kids in the house. I realized that I was judging people not even knowing what their story was. Going forward a few more months, one of the girls had a birthday, and she was having a birthday party, and she invited all of her friends to come over and spend the night. And I told my daughter that she could go for dinner and for playing, but I was going to pick her up. She couldn't stay there the night. My daughter called me a racist. And I said, no, I'm a mom and I want to keep my daughter safe. When you're a mom, you'll understand this later in life. Well, flash forward to now, my daughter was right. I learned something that day from her. And I have to say that I'm embarrassed now, because what was I telling that girl? What was I telling her family? That the home that they lived in every day, the home that they went to bed at every night and woke up safely every morning, wasn't safe enough for my daughter? I'm sorry. Flash forward to now, my daughter has grown up. She moved to Hollywood. She lives in a townhouse with a diverse group of friends. And I have to say, the first thing out of my mouth when I heard that she was moving there was, what's the crime rate? And as soon as it came out of my mouth, I realized what I had done. I'm so programmed to think that if it's not a white or some safe Asian, smart, hardworking Asians in my community, that somehow it's going to be crime infested, they're not going to be intelligent, et cetera. And I know better. I have diverse friends, and I talk to smart people. I've learned a lot in my life. But going back to my first day of kindergarten, I'm glad that I learned to be brave, and that sometimes you're uncomfortable, and that working through that discomfort and that fear leads to a much better, fulfilled life, and it makes me a better person. Thank you.
Heartfelt. Here's a similar heartfelt story. It's not nearly as true as yours. It's funnier, though. Dedicate this to the postal workers now, who are about to face a big task of ballots and under pressure. And there was this woman who worked at the post office. This is our offertory. And her job was to process all the mail that had addresses that weren't that clear to read. One day she came across a hand-addressed letter that was addressed to God with no actual address on it, of course. So she thought she'd open it. She opened up the letter and it read this. Dear God, I'm an 83-year-old widow. I live on a small pension. Yesterday, all the money I had in my purse, $100, was stolen. Next Sunday is Christmas. I invited my two only friends over for dinner, and without the money, I can't buy the food to put the dinner on. Dear God, would you help me? You're my only hope. Can you please help? Sincerely, Edna. Postal worker was touched. She showed the letter all around the post office, and everyone dug into their wallet a little bit, and they gathered together about $96, and they took that $96, stuck in an envelope, and mailed it back to the woman. The rest of the day, everybody felt pretty good about themselves, as we do when we donate to things usually. Christmas came and went, and a few days later, a letter came back from the same woman, addressed to God again, without an address, of course. And all the workers gathered around to read the letter. Here's what it read. It said, Dear God, how can I ever thank you enough for what you did to me? Because your gift of generosity and love, really a miracle, I was able to fix the glorious dinner for my friends on Christmas. It was great. However, sadly, there was $4 missing, and just between you and I think it was those crooked postal workers. Please give more generously than that. Amen.
This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences, beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together, in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. We pause in silent witness to that unity.
May the blessing of love be upon you. May love's peace abide with you. May love's presence illuminate your hearts now and forevermore. And as we say, so be it. Amen. Shalom. Salam. Namaste. And blessed be. And in the Quaker tradition, and now our service truly begins. Thanks for being here.